I want to introduce Jeff Flood. Jeff is the state lead for Marco's Maritime Commerce and Navigation Safety Working Group. He is a senior coastal planner with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. We have a nice stronghold of Virginia coastal zone management people here in the room today. We're really happy about that. And he is going to lead this panel discussion today. So Jeff, I will go ahead and pass it to you.
All right, folks, we're still going strong here as we're closing things out. We're the second to last session here, so hopefully some more folks are making it back in the room here. This is really an honor to present so many distinguished speakers. We've had just a great lineup today, so I can't thank everyone enough for attending. But I call this the A-team here. We have a just slightly different theme, as Avalon mentioned, in terms of a lot of power players in commerce and navigation, national security. And I think the theme of this will be, as we're talking about emerging ocean uses, I think it's really important to keep in mind the existing uses, our maintenance of our port, our dredging, our waterways, safety of navigation, understanding all those constraints and all the stressors that are accompanying those industries. So maritime industry, and then we've got the Coast Guard, and then NOAA as well as a resource for nautical charts. So just keep in mind that as we're trying to expand things on some new initiatives, we talked about offshore minerals, mining, all those things, offshore wind, we're all living through this, to understand the process of these existing core elements of our economy and our national security and all that infrastructure and all the jobs and our supply chain and everything we see when price goes up and if there's a blockage or if there's any maritime accidents, some of these folks are the first responders here. So I think it's really important to acknowledge those things and see where the existing coordination is going on and then find ways that, by learning that process that we can potentially help improve or help those folks, put them in touch with additional voices in the room for these expanding ocean uses. So we have Captain Whiting Chisman. He is the president of the Virginia Pilot Association. And we have Captain Peggy Britton, who is the commander of Sector Virginia, so the Coast Guard's presence in Virginia. And we have, we've got Keith Lockwood, who's the chief of the Water Resources Division with the Army Corps. I was trying to find his exact title. I apologize. But he is in charge of a lot of the navigational safety and the dredging. So the Army Corps has a great presence with our port as well. So hopefully to have the kind of this cross section here, we're also joined with Ryan Wartick with NOAA. So we're going to hear from the federal government and from industry to understand some of their perspectives. And we're going to kick it off with Captain Chisman with his presentation, and then we'll have Chief Lockwood will give his PowerPoint, and then we're going to have all four folks with some prepared questions as the panel, and then we'll open it up to general questions. So I think we'll probably have a shorter talking at you, and then we'll have a sort of discussion between us, moderated by myself, and then we'll open up to questions at the end. So without further ado, Captain Chisman, thank you so much, sir.
So do I just press the right key? Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff, for the kind introduction. And again, I'm Whiting Chisman. I'm the president of the Virginia Pilot Association. If you don't know, we are the group of state licensed pilots here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that bring in a lot of the shipping traffic into the port. And just to set things off, we work very closely with the partners that we have here on the podium, Captain Britton with the Coast Guard and Keith with the Corps and Ryan with NOAA. We all work very closely to ensure that whatever happens offshore does not do any harm to the maritime ocean shipping interest of Virginia. And this is very important to consider for any future existing and future development for offshore, whether it's wind, marine fisheries, oil and gas, and I'll get into that in a few slides. So I'd just like to make a few comments about that. I'm also a member of the board of directors of the Virginia Maritime Association, which is the local association that represents, approximately 75 businesses in the Commonwealth of Virginia and outside of Virginia, and their interest in the maritime domain. And this doesn't only include ocean carriers and shippers, it includes warehousing, it includes truckers, it includes businesses in Ohio, because a lot of the container traffic that comes into Virginia is railed to Ohio and as far south as Memphis. We are the most direct link to the Midwest of any other East Coast container port. So, and the one living example I'd like to use about ocean development and the processes that should exist for that ocean development, we'll go ahead and discuss the offshore wind, coastal Virginia offshore wind development. So if you're looking at this chart that is on the screen, some may consider that the front door, if you will, to the Chesapeake Bay and all of the commerce of the Chesapeake Bay and Virginia and Maryland, because sometimes in Virginia we forget to mention that the entrance to Chesapeake Bay also is the port of Baltimore. That's access for Baltimore. So the front door looks like the line between, if you're not familiar with it, there's Cape Henry and then Cape Charles, which is at the southern tip of the eastern shore. And this is off of the Marco website. And over, these were and are, and actually I can't speak, I admit, to exactly which ones are approved, but these were proposed leases for wind farm areas off the coast of not only Virginia, but Delaware, a little bit of New Jersey. And if I were to have expanded this screenshot here, I could include New York. So in the Biden administration, you had thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of square miles that were being reserved by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for the development of wind. And our Virginia Pilot Association and the Virginia Maritime Association's work with this goes back almost 20 years, because the first time that BOEM proposed the future wind farm, which is now the developed wind farm, they were planning to put it right in the middle of a deepwater corridor off the coast of Virginia. And through the work of the Virginia Maritime Association and the Coast Guard back at the time, and working with the federal authorities in this permitting process, we got the wind farm moved a little bit south so that it doesn't inhibit what is actually an offshore deepwater trough that is used by commercial shipping to get into and exit Chesapeake Bay, which, going back 20 years, it didn't seem so critical as it does today, because 20 years ago, the ships were nowhere near as big as they are today. The Commonwealth of Virginia is almost finished with the 55-foot project, which means currently the ship channels into Norfolk have a depth of 50 feet, and the offshore Atlantic Ocean channel is 52 feet. And just within the next couple of months, when all this dredging is complete, the shipping channel into Virginia will be 55 feet, and the Atlantic Ocean channel will be 59 feet. And even though we have them today, it's going to increase in the future. We have the biggest ships in the world coming here to Virginia. And the deep draft, once the project is finished, that these ships can come into Virginia with a rising tide is 52 feet, 6 inches. That's the deep draft. And so in the past, and I'm just going to say it, the ocean planners, when they look at this map, they see nothing but blue offshore. And it looks like it's the vast open ocean, and it is not. The front door to Virginia is actually approximately 50 miles off the coast, east of the existing wind farm lease areas. Because of this, starting back in 2020, we, the Virginia Pilot Association, the Maritime Association, and the Coast Guard, which was because of all these lease areas, started what was the Atlantic Coast Port Access Route Study to create safety fairways and these lanes from New York to Florida to ensure that the ocean shipping lanes to Virginia were not, and other states, were not closed. Literally, if you were to develop without any consideration of this, it could close the front door of Chesapeake Bay to major ocean shipping. So, you see the safety fairways. There's a lane north of the wind farm areas. Is this a pointer? Here is the existing current coastal Virginia offshore wind farm. This will be the next one that's developed. These were proposed. And so, and even this, I will let the group know, we were not satisfied with what this north safety fairway is here, which goes around the north side of the wind farm. This is where the deepest water is, which I have another slide for that in a moment. But this lane is approximately 8 miles wide. And if these wind farms were developed fully south of this lane and north of this lane, you're not going to have a ship in the North Atlantic come within feet or even a mile or two of an existing wind farm, they're going to have a safety buffer. So you're looking at a lane that's approximately 4 miles wide for shipping traffic of the state of Virginia, Maryland, and the United States Navy using these lanes. This deep water corridor, which you can see right here, has been used since the late 1980s and early 1990s when we started sailing 50-foot draft coal ships from Virginia. This area is the sea lane, deep loaded coal ship with a draft of 50 feet. When they leave, they go this way. It is naturally deep, 60 feet or greater. In this new world of shipping, these ultra-large container vessels require, at sea, about a 20% underkeel clearance. It's generally an industry safety standard. So if you have a draft of 50 feet when you're sailing, 20% of that is 10 feet. So they need at least 60 feet of water to get out. And that is the only way out. It is a competitive advantage for Virginia. To put it into perspective, this is a chart area of one of our biggest competitors to the south, the port of Savannah. And they are the second largest container port on the East Coast, where New York is the biggest port on the East Coast. Savannah is the second largest container port on the East Coast. Virginia is the third, but we are the second largest port on the East Coast by tonnage. And this is what it looks like offshore for them. They do not have the naturally deep corridor that we have. So we are very fortunate with this natural deep water trough off the coast of Virginia. So this is an AIS shot. I assume most of you are familiar with this because the Marco portal is somewhere where you can go access this data, and you can look at historical AIS data. So these dark colored lines that leave the sea lane here, and then they go off in all directions, represent ocean shipping that leaves, and the wind farm wasn't there when it existed. So you see a lot of lines through the middle of the wind farm. And so even today, with the wind farm, basically it's not complete, but all the monopiles are in place, so vessels are not sailing through the wind farm. All of this traffic that you see is going to have to be rerouted north of the wind farm into that lane that we showed you, and here it actually shows there's a 2-mile buffer, 4 miles, and a 2-mile buffer from what would be the northern wind farm if that were to ever be developed. So you're squeezing, again, all of this traffic into this narrow corridor in the middle of the North Atlantic, which it could be dark, it could be foggy, you could have heavy weather, and that's just the sea lane part of it. There's also future development, which we all know this is coming, and it's one of the big initiatives of the Virginia Maritime Association, are onshore data cables coming from Europe or all over the world. And this, again, is another example of the close partnership that we have had with not only the development of the wind farm and the Coast Guard and the Corps and NOAA, because these things have all presented issues where Captain Britton can speak to the safety fairways and navigational safety of the ships. Keith can speak to the permitting for things that have been placed on the bottom. I don't want to steal Keith's thunder, but things that are placed on the bottom near the entrance to the sea lane that require the 408 permitting process from the Corps of Engineers. And then Ryan Wartick, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Manager for NOAA, that these things that happen, the cables being on the bottom or the future of the safety fairways, they have to be charted. So it is a full team effort. And again, the biggest concern that we have, and as a citizen of the Commonwealth of Virginia, is that ocean development or proposed and considered ocean development were to go forward without the close collaboration, which in the previous segment, I was glad to hear the communication between stakeholders, but the close collaboration with not only the commercial interest, the Port of Virginia, the Virginia Maritime Association, but our federal partners here in the Commonwealth. And I think I've actually been accused of doctoring this slide, but I can assure you it's very accurate. Everyone knows about the United States aircraft carrier, and it looks like it's one of the biggest ships in the world. And it was when I started my career. I've been here for about 33 years, and I'm here to tell you that it is not. So the traffic that I'm talking about that's being squeezed into these narrow lanes about 30 miles off the coast of Virginia are ships actually bigger than the container ship that you see here, this OOCL container ship. This is a 14,000 TEU container ship, which is somewhat of the workhorse today of the commercial shipping container fleet. And actually here in Virginia, we have 17,000 TEU container ships now. And there's no doubt in my mind in the future we will have 20 to 22,000 TEU container ships coming to Virginia, not to mention enormous bulk carriers that sail with coal, which 90% of the coal that leaves Virginia, which is the biggest coal exporting complex in North America, and 90% of the coal is used for steel making, those ships will be sailing at a draft of 55 feet. So, and this is one of my favorite mantras, but to make sure everyone understands that the world is coming to Virginia, and it will take all of us to ensure that we are successful in that endeavor. So thank you for allowing me to speak today.
So thank you, folks. Remember the front door to Virginia is right here in Hampton Roads. Chief Lockwood, I'd like to invite you up for your PowerPoint, and you got an idea of yet another issue with the width of the lanes. Now we're talking about depth, so we'll hear kind of a 3D assessment of those navigation channels. Thanks, sir.
All right, good afternoon. As Jeff mentioned, I'm Keith Lockwood, Chief of the Water Resources Division for the Norfolk District Army Corps of Engineers. Been with the Norfolk District 24 years, mostly on dredging and navigation. What I'm going to talk about this afternoon is really related to an event that happened a few years ago up in Maryland, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and the catastrophe there with the ship colliding with the bridge. And so we had an exercise last summer with the Joint Port Recovery Executive Committee on what would happen in the event of two of these ultra-large container vessels running into each other, having a collision, and blocking the channel. And so when we talk about a little bit about emergency dredging and what we can do now to prepare for such an event. But first, I want to give some context on the federal roles within navigation mission. So the Corps of Engineers, and I love this graphic that kind of helps illustrate it. So with the Corps of Engineers, we're surveying within the channels, we're conducting the maintenance dredging within the channels, and we're also doing improvements such as Captain Chisman mentioned, the Norfolk Harbor deepening. NOAA is the navigation manager for the port. They're surveying everything else outside the channels. And then the Coast Guard, the port access, security, as navigation, really the ones that are, setting, are we open, what restrictions do we have on navigation, and then for the Navy here on readiness. So we have quarterly meetings with our quad federal entities to talk about issues, so we're all aligned and collaborating. So for dredging considerations, now I'm going to get into a little bit more of actual emergency dredging. So in your mind, think of if the channel was blocked, the entrance channel coming in at Thimble Shoals going into Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and that's actually what this e-hydro map shows. So the blue is deeper water, red is where it's shallow. So that's what when we go survey, we get these soundings and we can put it in a map with the colors to show where maintenance dredging is needed, where deep water is, and this is coming into Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. So there's several types of equipment. You have a hopper dredge, which is just a real big steel vacuum, has two vacuums, one on each side, and they're sucking up sediment, a slurry, about 70% of it's water actually. It gets into that hopper. You can see that picture there. It's pumping that in. It sails it to usually an ocean disposal site, a placement site, and opens up. It's a split hull, and then just repeats that. Mechanical bucket dredging, that's just your crane and large mechanical bucket going down, taking scoops. And then hydraulic cutter head pipeline is basically you have a pipeline with a pump, and at the end you do have like a head with teeth on it that rotates, and it's creating that slurry and sucking up through the pipe to places that could be upwards of 4 or 5 miles. Disposal options, so we have a couple ocean placement sites. Norfolk Ocean Disposal Site, which is about 18 miles offshore. Dam Neck Ocean Disposal Site, which is just about 3 or 4 miles offshore Dam Neck. I do want to highlight this later under a slide on permitting, but federal regulations do not provide for emergency permits under the Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, so I'll get into a little bit about that later. We do have the Craney Island Dredge Material Management Area here, which is a 2,500 acre, 4 square mile facility that just takes in dredge material from Norfolk Harbor. It's been around since the 40s, and it's the largest in the country. And then overboard placement in the vicinity of dredging, and I mentioned that in regards to emergency dredging because, I think high production is critical. Time trying to establish a new channel or a bypass channel around what is blocking the channel. So dredge material placement alternatives will consider what would be the highest production. What's key here also on placement areas is the depth is really important. Most of the Chesapeake Bay is shallow, less than 25 feet, and I have a slide that kind of highlights that too. And hopper dredges need a minimum of 25 feet to be able to sail. So if you're doing a hopper dredge, you couldn't just go outside the channel because they would run aground. So they'd have to be going out to the ocean disposal sites. But mechanical dredging with scows, they require a minimum of 17, so we definitely have that flexibility. And as I mentioned, I've been with the district for 24 years, but I learned something new all the time. And since we've been starting this exercise, I learned that in the 30s and 40s, we used to just place the material for maintenance dredging at Thimble Shoal Channel to the south. One area west of Little Creek and one that bisected the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel on the east side of Little Creek Inlet. And approximately 8.5 million cubic yards was placed. So these are areas that are highly productive, areas of essential fish habitat, but at one point over many decades, years, 8.5 million cubic yards of material was placed there. So it is a resource, so we'd certainly try to maximize beneficially using dredge material in normal circumstances. Under this, an emergency dredging scenario, we're looking at the fastest way to reopen a channel. Permitting considerations, I just have the list here, but I'll highlight the Section 103 of the MPRSA, and that requires a stringent sampling and testing protocol where we're taking sediment and then running not only the chemistry of it, but then we put it in a lab where you have control, and then with clean sediment, and you have the material we're going to dredge, and you put worms and other organisms in there to make sure that they'll survive. And then you get approved for 3 years under the MPRSA. And so we wouldn't have time to do that in an emergency event. We wouldn't know exactly where it would occur and that's the sediment we would need to test. So really, ocean disposal's off the table for if an event like this. And then at the bottom there is if the Corps of Engineers was not performing the work in an emergency dredging event, we would still be doing the permitting under Sections 10 and 408 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. And I do have a quick slide on what our procedures are if someone else were to do it. But the emergency part, if it was unacceptable hazard to life, a significant loss of property, or immediate unforeseen and significant economic hardship. And that's kind of what we're going on with the significant economic hardship here if we were having to close the port while we waited to reopen due to that elision. And I don't think I want, other than it's really key that all this pre-consultation would occur so as much work can be done to mitigate concerns and risks as we move forward in the event. And then this is a slide so that when we first started this exercise last year, there was an idea of why don't we create a redundant backup channel where we would just cut from Thimble Shoals up to Cape Henry Channel across the bay. So this would outline what that process would look like. It's about 7 to 10 years from start to finish if we started now. And there's some big hurdles. One is that, under a feasibility study, we have to justify that the benefit's more than the cost, and that benefit's based on commercial use, commercial tonnage, which would be hard to justify given that it would be a duplicate channel. The other thing is, I already mentioned, it's shallow. So we have a channel that's 55 feet, and most of the bay is less than 20 feet in some areas. So you'd have a huge volume of material that you'd have to dredge and maintain. So I just highlight this. We sort of kind of talked about it and realized that that probably wasn't the best approach. Went off of the big screen, sorry. But so what we're doing now, and since last year when we did the exercise, we've conducted a GIS analysis to identify existing conditions, resources, and conflicts. So that one on the top left there, the dark red is that 20 feet of depth, and then you can see the Thimble Shoals Channel right down in the middle, the Cape Henry channels the far to the north, and then Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel to the east where that blue is. Well, actually, that's going out to the ocean, and then Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel to the west. But we are able to look at layers such as already known cultural resources, such as submerged wrecks, and then also we overlaid with those historic placement sites that I mentioned from the 30s and 40s. Of course, now there are Navy anchorages now, so they are already spoken for, so we'll have to look elsewhere. But based on this, we see that it's slightly deeper to the south of the channel, and it's pretty open to the north. So right now we're kind of looking at, we would want to minimize dredging by looking south of the channel and then placement to the north. That bottom one is really just, it's kind of what we'd expect. The sands, that purple is what we would anticipate is mostly sands, but it really is data gaps. And then the green is sort of your more fine grain material. But really next steps, we're beginning coordination with our navigation stakeholders to determine the level of service. So that means like what dimensions are needed for these ships really to maneuver around. What is that ideal, both from maneuverability and width and length. Identifying the dredge material management area and placement, doing that environmental coordination. Most of what I listed before, except for 103, do have emergency provisions. We can do a lot of the coordination. We can do NEPA. We can do a lot of that consultation and have it ready to go so that we've been able to voice the concerns, mitigate those, and have a plan. And then also, along with the Coast Guard, we're incorporating the unified command, initiation, and coordination of the plan. So that's already laid out too. That was something that was stood up when the Key Bridge incident occurred, and is really critical on how we would move forward in executing and leading an emergency dredging effort. So in a year, we're taking a joint port recovery exercise last summer into an actionable strategy for an emergency event. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
So I'll actually, folks hear me? There we go. All right. So to give our other speakers a chance to kind of just briefly give an overview of their positions, their duties, their responsibilities, and how they collaborate with our other two speakers who did present, I want to turn it to Captain Britton just really quickly to talk about Coast Guard Sector Virginia and then the area committee and the area contingency plan. And that exercise was hosted by the area committee at the meeting back in, I think it was early September, that Chief Lockwood referred to. So, the floor is yours.
Are you all still with us? Tough to hang in there on the end of the day, so forgive me if I talk in stories, but that's me. I'm wrapping up 26 years in the Coast Guard, and 22 of those have been in the Mid-Atlantic, which is, if you ask my cohorts, I think this is coming in and out, is sort of unheard of. The only 4 when I was not here was out in Hawaii, where I like to think myself as sort of a tuna warrior. I was on a buoy tender, and we sailed over 15,000 miles of Pacific Ocean, but enforced fisheries long line laws about tuna fisheries in U.S. EECs. So for those of you who are the marine biologists, kind of like whale wars, but for tuna. So early on, I did nothing but buoy tenders, and I really grew an affinity for this mission that the Coast Guard has, which is to service our aids to navigation, and predominantly did that in North Carolina, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Delaware Bay. And my last smaller unit, I did all the buoys in the offshore of New Jersey and the Delaware Bay, and I even let the academicians put some sturgeon sensors on my buoys. Don't tell. But I grew a profound respect for what that means, and that's to preserve the safety and security of our waterways commerce. Not only so that we can facilitate commerce, because we all like our stuff from Amazon, but so we can do so safely and prevent or mitigate any environmental catastrophes. So really that was the one thing with serving in the Coast Guard. It was saving lives, but also protecting the environment. And in doing this role here with the Army Corps and with the pilots and the Virginia Maritime Association, and especially with NOAA, we're trying to get after this in a way that preserves the environment, protects commerce, and facilitates all interests, including those of the United States Navy. And as we learned in that Joint Port Recovery Executive Committee exercise, they might have very little tactical level patience for us doing things in a deliberate fashion, in a unified command, and with considerations of the environment at the forefront. They're going to have not a lot of tolerance for slow and deliberate, right? In fact, I think one of the colleagues said we would go kinetic on it. And I was like, you're not going to blow up something in the channel. So we really have to work together as a team here to preserve the channel and to talk about how we would mitigate any collision or any blockage in a way that is considerate of our environment and of all of the stakeholders, including our national security interests, because the world has changed dramatically here in the last months. And that might mean that we need to get the United States Navy, the world's largest Navy, out of this port in an expedited fashion, and there will be little tolerance for a blockage of the channel. So I will just mention that that particular exercise was very illuminating. But on a routine basis, these partners, I think the hallmark of Hampton Roads and what really works well here is that we collaborate. You've heard reference this quad meeting. The quad is the meeting of the 4 big partners here, and to really talk about and communicate early these kinds of interests that Captain Chisman and Captain Rabina repeatedly will highlight for us, is that we have considerations that we have to be very deliberate and thoughtful about. How do we preserve our waterways for shared interests, for the safety and security of all the users? And that even talks about, I hate to throw out our safe speed, right? When we talk about safe speed, we're working with potentially with NMFIS. Safe speed also, though, there's a security and a safety concern for our professional mariners. If we reduce speed so slowly that we might actually make a situation far worse because we've reduced maneuverability. So we have to talk about those concerns, if I'm hopefully not being too cryptic. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm very interested in your questions, noting the previous panel, and how does that parlay into this for your considerations, not only from an academic standpoint and environmental standpoint, but also the commercial interests that are at stake. So I'll conclude there, Jeff. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Captain Britton. Ryan, if you want to just kind of do the same kind of overview of your role with NOAA and collaboration with the federal partners.
Absolutely. So Ryan Wartick, I've been working for NOAA in the last 18 years, pretty much. And in the first 13 of that, I was primarily working in the field, working on research vessels around the country. So I've spent time from the Arctic, Alaska, West Coast, East Coast, and down in the Gulf. So I've been kind of all over the country, working in the field, collecting data to support navigation. So updating charts, creating charts. So that's kind of like my background with NOAA. And NOAA really does a lot to support maritime commerce and navigation, really. So we create and produce all the charts, all the nautical charts for navigation in U.S. and U.S. waters. We maintain the Coast Pilot. So if there are any mariners out there, you're familiar with the Coast Pilot. We have a fleet of research vessels, and with some of those being hydrographic research vessels, the vessels out there collecting the type of data we use to update charts. But then we have multiple different types of vessels as well, and then we also have a fleet of smaller vessels that do more regional work. So one of those being our navigation response teams, which are about 30-foot, 28-foot trailerable vessels that will come in and do kind of regional stuff. They do emergency response work. So like they were involved in Francis Scott Key Bridge response and also the DCA response as well. So we also, we do tides and currents. So all of the tide and current observations and predictions and models, those are part of the Office Coast Survey. We also have kind of closely related is our ports program, which like tides and currents, you're typically seeing like predictions and model information, whereas our ports program is providing real-time information. So real-time information such as tides and currents, air gap for bridges, visibility sensors, and like wind speed and direction, wave height, all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole suite of sensors that are part of that, and the ports program supports all of the biggest ports around the country. So like here in Virginia, we have a pretty robust ports program that has historically been primarily sponsored by the Navy, by the Department of Defense. So that's been kind of like one of the benefits of having such a large presence of the Navy here. And then, let's see what else I was going to mention. Also, so if you're not a mariner, you might not be aware of this, but there's a big evolution in charts right now that's been happening for the last 5 years or so, and then it's going to be the next 5 years as we're kind of wrapping up that process. And part of that is the retirement of the traditional paper chart. So at this point, paper charts are gone. Our entire suite of charts are ENC, so electronic navigation charts, and we're also in the process of transitioning from S57 standard, which basically controlled how a chart is made and the type of information it displayed and how it displayed it and how electronic navigation systems use those ENC files. So we're transitioning from S57 to S100, which is something that's it's been in the works for years and years and years, and it's something that we're just starting to pilot in a couple different ports around the country, but it's coming to prime time, in the next couple of years as well. So one of the cool things about S100 is it provides us opportunity to provide a whole lot of additional products that have never been available before. So things like, actually looking at your chart display and seeing real-time tides and currents, real-time wind information, real-time wave information, real-time soundings and contours that are adjusting with the state of the tide, and you can do a lot of cool things like inputting the draft of your vessel, and you can color the channels like green or red. Like, is my ship gonna be able to sail in here based on the current tide, the draft of my ship, and whatever the charted depth of that channel is. So there's a lot of cool things coming with technology as we're advancing. So this time period, we went hundreds of years having paper charts, and just in the last couple years, paper charts are gone, and we're transitioning to this other chart standard. So a lot going on right now in the navigation safety realm, and I'll kind of wrap it up there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I think just a great sampling size of just the different roles and missions of each of these organizations, both private and public sector. I had a couple of questions that I had sent to these folks here in advance, give them some softballs, but they've actually already answered some of the questions about how their relationships with other organizations up here, how they coordinate. We talked about the different planning bodies, and I can say, for one, that as part of the Virginia State Ocean Plan development, I had the privilege of being on the Transportation, Navigation, and Security Work Group, and to talk with some of the same folks right here today, among many others. So I learned so much about just the existing coordination, and that I just never even really thought that was going on. Like, we try to wrap our minds around a busy ocean. Well, we've got busy people who are doing a lot of things every single day, keep us safe, keep the port open. So I was just thinking, I think it's always an opportunity to be candid and understand where the state is bringing together these folks. We don't have, as CZM, an authority to butt into this process, to join a work group. We're here as facilitators, as is demonstrated today with Marco. But to each of the speakers, what would be one thing maybe to streamline coordination that maybe you're not required to engage with a state entity, or there's a federal agency that's not part of the Quad? I mean, how would that work? And that goes for Captain Chisman as well in the private sector. Again, we're trying to make sure that the coordination is happening, beyond what is required through a permitting process. I think the best communication, the best dialogues is well in advance when it's not out for public notice or you're not in an emergency situation. So I'll start with you, Captain Chisman. Go down the line.
I think that's a great question, and I can use, instead of hypothesizing about what could be in the future, I'll use the existing example of the 2022 notice of proposed rulemaking for changing the, no marine fisheries, changing the right whale speed regulation, which that could be the whole conference with what I know about it. But I suffice it to say, when the rulemaking started in 22, I found it interesting that they came back to the states near the end of the process for the federal consistency determination with state regulation. And so that's one example where, and that's kind of through those efforts and the abandoned and derelict vessel initiatives where I've worked with Jeff pretty closely, that that there is forward conversations whenever something like that is coming down from the federal government, NOAA, or wherever.
I'd add on the abandoned vessel front that folks may be aware of that. There's a lot of folks in the room. Katie Register was here yesterday and today with Clean Virginia Waterways. So that process, we probably have seen that in the news. A lot of boats in Hampton Roads that have been abandoned. Some are leaking pollution, all that sort of stuff. That's something I presented at the area committee with the Coast Guard, taking keen interest in working with them. But it was front page news for a couple of years and still continues to be intermittently. And I was able to say, well, the government is actually working on it. So we had started a work group in 2021, and we're about to release a report with all the recommendations, which did lead to a state program, grant program with localities for tribes and localities through VMRC. So we were able to say, hey, we're working on it. So again, behind the scenes, I think another way to showcase things, just my personal take is increasing the public outreach, understanding the processes, this critical collaboration that we're doing right now, being able to broadcast that and say, yes, we're doing our job, y'all are safe, so I think that's really, really messaging as well. So, Captain Britton.
Well, if I could also add to that I would echo what you just said, because with and again, the whale speed regulation is something we were very closely involved with, and but that the coastal zone management plan in Virginia, really, that's when it started to stand up and perform, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. Yeah. Then we started developing the coastal zone management plan, and to your point, that that there is more collaboration and helping us understand the process, because it was very helpful once we got to the consistency letter from the state for the right whale regulations.
To be succinct, your question is, when do we use a team approach? Is that what you're asking?
And what could be improved upon that if there is a way?
I think it's a challenging question to answer, right? So that's why I joke, should I go security or should I go pollution? Let's go pollution. So one of the really cool authorities that I get to wear is the Federal On-Scene Coordinator. Anytime that you're looking to inspire a team approach with a federal, state, and local, I would say, complementary lines of effort, it can get a little bit messy because we all have different authorities and jurisdictions. But one of the things that I love about the role now as the Federal On-Scene Coordinator is that I get to co-chair this thing called the Area Committee. And I do so with the EPA, the State Department of Environmental Quality, and an assorted number of, I would call them my environmental warriors. I'm going to see them tomorrow at the Regional Response Team in Chincoteague. And we meet quarterly, and we inform the area contingency plan. And in that plan, we're looking at things like environmentally sensitive areas, and so that we can dust off contingency plans when and if something happens. My Valentine's Day weekend was ruined, I will say, due to a jet fuel spill from a big partner, right? And how do we get after that? We did it in a way that was collaborative, and we did it together. And I cannot emphasize enough the collaboration with the EPA, the State Department of Environmental Quality, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, my local emergency managers, local police and fire. Everybody came together to do assessments, and that's how we proceeded. And truly, we all know that no matter what your problem set it is, it's going to become about information management. We would not have had a successful response had it not been for my DEQ partners, who who hung information on a public-facing site, it would continue to funnel information that way. And so that's why I asked, do you want to go security, do you want to go pollution? Because it's going to come down to brokering public trust in managing information on any given response. And speed is of the essence. So I just highlight that one. I joke around about Valentine's Day weekend, but how do we get after it together, wielding all of our unique authorities and jurisdictions? And then when the response is concluded, how do we assess environmental damages? And then how do we hold people accountable for bad behavior? So that's just one example, and I'm happy to talk more about that if you're interested.
I'll be concise as well. So there are two things I want to highlight. So Section 408, I get to serve as our 408 coordinator for the district, and Section 408 of the Rivers and Harbors Act is basically anything that could alter a federal project. So it seems almost like anything touching the water could be affecting a navigation project. So with that, I see all the new projects going in on, around Virginia and the port and the inland waterways and then out in the ocean. So we coordinate those with our stakeholders and the public in some situations. So that's a great avenue I see for us with the Corps of Engineers. But then also, really, this kind of forum. I appreciate being invited here. This is great, and being able to say, hey, what are we doing that you wouldn't know about? And that way, if you're interested, you can reach out and we can get more feedback that way. So I think those are the two things I'd highlight.
So I have real quick. So I'm the Mid-Atlantic Navigation Manager. So my region, I have a region that I cover, which is basically here, Baltimore and Philadelphia. So I was involved I was at the incident command centers for both the FSK and DCA responses, and I just wanted to mention the reason for the success for those responses, I believe would the same reason why if something happened here, we would be successful as well, because we have established partnerships. We're, the federal partners, state representatives, and private industry. We're always talking, meeting, emailing. There's great collaboration and communication, like there was in Baltimore, like there was in DC, that allowed those incidences to be handled very successfully considering the circumstances. So that was all I was going to say.
Appreciate that. All right, last question for everyone. Get right back down the line here. Actually combining some questions we've all seen before. So what is the one thing related to this whole topic of national security, maritime commerce, dredging, all that stuff that keeps you up at night? So one, you got to pick one. And how might you, what could we do to help you sleep better? And then that, examples, of course, not to speak for folks, but, we talk about the shipping fairways. We talk about the width of those navigation channels. Subsea cables were mentioned, and emergency dredging, so stuff like that. But anything new stuff we haven't talked about either. So, Captain Chisman?
I sleep pretty well at night, and I can't pick a single thing, but and again, I'm glad for forums like this, because I guess it would be not well understood complex matters related to ocean shipping off of our coasts, and including the inland waters. But I didn't say this in my initial remarks, and it's important to remember, but 90% of the world's commerce moves by ship, at least, and if not more. And the economy of Virginia alone, maritime business, which includes warehousing, supply chain, logistics, and everything like that, it's 20% of GDP of the state. So I think we've gained a lot of experience in the last 20 years with a lot of different interests. In 2008, it was oil and gas that they were going to go drill offshore. And then a few years later, it turned into wind. And I know that there will be rare earths and data cables and all kinds of things. And I think we've gone through a good initial phase in learning and collaborating and working together with the appropriate bureaus, agencies, state, local, federal government, and but that these developments were to go forward without an understanding of everything that's going on in the domain that they choose to develop.
I can't pick one. I can't pick one. I'm an insomniac, so
5.
maybe I'll pick up for Captain Chisman. Sorry. There's a lot that keeps me up at night because there's really a lot of things that we just don't know we don't know. And I'm not afraid of technology or change or improvements, but I do recognize that there's some inherent risk that we may not be fully cognizant of. There's just superficially, a hurricane or a severe weather event would keep me awake. Why? Because it could parlay into some sort of a massive pollution event, or some sort of a collision could parlay into a massive pollution event. That would certainly give me consternation. But the things that really are more nefarious are the things like a cybersecurity attack, an AIS spoofing, where we see something that's there that may not be there, or vice versa. An attack on our GPS systems, because so much is automated now, and GPS is integral to those systems. Or, I know the way that I felt, this is an I feel statement, with some very sophisticated and persistent UAS brooches here outside of Langley Air Force Base in December of 24. And so anything having to do with UAS, whether that's aerial, surface, or subsurface, I don't think we have a good grasp on. And we're seeing them used in wartime applications, and there's going to be a national security application at some point, and I don't think we have a great grasp on it. And we are advancing autonomous vehicles, and we need to do so in a very deliberative fashion that sort of fences the risk with some sort of a human-in-the-loop interface so that we don't have a next bad day. So hopefully that won't keep you up tonight.
Well, I'm glad Captain Britton has in her mission set security, so I don't have to worry about that.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for my son waking me up, what I might keep me up thinking about is, and Captain Chisman, you touched on it with all the uses out there. So keeping our 2 authorized disposal sites available, and then also sand sources in the future. So we lead the Coastal Storm Risk Management Program. We're actually doing multiple studies all the way from Miami up to New Jersey. We're leading those studies out of Norfolk. So we're doing Virginia Beach. Norfolk's already in construction, and then Peninsula, like Hampton and Poquoson. But we're doing Raritan Bay, Keensburg area, New Jersey, and then down to Miami. So, but all of these resiliency studies and coastal risk management program, like the measures include a lot of dunes and other features that require a lot of sand. So we're partnering with BOEM on where those are, and you heard from Kirby this morning, so it was a great talk on what they're doing to identify where it is. But there's already conflicts out there that's, offshore wind, other things that are on top of sand resources. So I am concerned about where we're going to be able to tap into that, to mine those, to make our communities more resilient in the future.
So I already talked a little bit about kind of the transition going on within NOAA as far as navigation goes. But if I were to use a kind of a sports analogy, the last, this period that we're in right now is kind of like a building season, in the sense that we're still in the middle of this transition. We're developing new tools. We're not only switching from paper charts to ENCs, but we're completely rebuilding our suite of ENC charts. We're building a new system for how we actually update and maintain our charts. So we're building something called the National Bathymetric Source, or NBS. And basically what this is it's taking all of our bathymetric data, not only like our recent data, but going back through our archives and unarchiving all of our modern bathymetric data as far back as it goes, putting it into one source that we can then, every time we update source, then that ENC cell gets flagged, hey, we need to update this ENC cell. We've got new source. in this cell, so the soundings will get updated, the contours will get updated. So we're fundamentally changing the way we do a lot of things, and to put these new systems in place are 5-10 year projects that we've been working on now for quite a while, and we're getting now finally towards the tail end of that. So we're going to be kind of implementing that stuff. We're also using a lot of crowdsourced bathymetry, which is something that's kind of new for us. We've always had very, very, very high standards for the information we use putting on charts, but we've come to realize that maybe there's information that doesn't necessarily meet our highest standards, but it's better than what's on the chart now. Believe it or not, only about 50% of U.S. waters and U.S. territories have been charted to modern standards. So a lot of that is like up in Alaska, in the Arctic, offshore areas. But if you were to look at all of U.S. waters and territories, we're only about 50% charted to modern standards. So we're starting to use things like I said, crowdsourced bathymetry data, partnerships with states, with private private terminals or states or whatever, to get a hold of their data so we can use that for charting. So we're trying to do a lot of that stuff to kind of move us to the next step. And so it's just a big transition thing. And we talked about autonomous. One interesting thing is, if you have an autonomous vessel that's trying to navigate, they can't navigate by a paper chart. So that's one of the drivers that has pushed us towards electronic navigation. Autonomous systems have to have an electronic vector chart that they can actually look at and read, because they can't read a paper chart. So kind of an interesting side note on that. So,
all right, folks, I really appreciate everyone's time here, both the audience and our distinguished panelists. Last thing I'll just say real quick is that the forum is great here. We rotate through different states with Marco, but the work group that Jess and I co-lead on this exact topic of maritime commerce and navigational safety, these are the topics that come up: the subsea cables, the dredging, the Coast Guard fairways. So these discussions are ongoing, so it's important to remember that the value of Marco as an ongoing collaborative body beyond these events. So thank you all. Please give a warm welcome. Thank you to all of our distinguished panelists.